All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, it's been a bit of a tough weekend for the rugby league community. We lost the legend of the sport, Rob Burrow. He passed away on Sunday. I believe we got the news Sunday evening. A tragic loss for the community, and still, as we just touched on before the podcast, came as a bit of a shock, even though everyone was sort of expecting this day would come, but just tragic news, isn't it?
Well, we all knew that Rob wouldn't survive in the long term, although he did incredibly well to survive for almost 5 years after the initial diagnosis. I think 50% of people who are diagnosed with MND die within 2 years. So that was an incredible achievement, and it showed his spirit and willpower in itself to live for that long. But yes, it was a shock when it came, Jake, and it's so incredibly sad. And we learned about it actually at 6 o'clock on Sunday night. I mean, we print at 8 o'clock, League Express. So to suddenly get that news at 6 o'clock was, apart from being a hell of a shock, we suddenly had to revise what we were doing. Certainly the front page, you'll see the front page here. It's only the second time that we've had a black masthead actually on League Express. The first time was when the Queen died in September 2022. But obviously Rob Burrow is such an incredible icon of our sport that we felt that we had to do that. We felt obliged to commemorate him, and we found what we thought was perhaps the most appropriate picture of him that we could put on the front page, which showed him after his diagnosis, but while he was still able to stand and be with his teammates and friends and communicate and so on. So, that was... and we didn't put a headline on because apart from Rob Burrow's CBE 1982 to 2024, what more could you say? And it's we were so sad on Sunday night, and it really put a dampener on us, I suppose. And we only had time. A lot of the newspaper had already gone to the printers by that stage, so there was not much that we could change. But we actually changed the front page clearly, and then changed page 3 to report and take some initial reactions from people who were, giving their response to the news. But it was devastating, really. But at the end of the day, we've got to celebrate Rob's life because, I mean, his diagnosis just proved how cruel life can be. Of all the people who didn't deserve to get this terrible disease, I mean, nobody deserves it, do they? But of all the people who didn't deserve it, it was him. He'd entertained us for so many years as a top player, done so many great things in our sport. He'd got married, had a absolutely wonderful family. His wife, Lindsay, is just, in my view, and his 3 kids are absolutely marvellous. His parents are great, his sisters, the whole Burrow family. If you were to pick a family to, exemplify a good family, then that would be it. So it's awful, but as I say, we've just got to celebrate what he was and all the positive things about Rob, and remember him, as a wonderful rugby league player and a wonderful human being.
That's right, and the fight that he showed off the field really represented the fight that he showed on the field. He's 5'5", one of the smallest players we've ever seen in our game. Always played with tremendous heart, courage, and
skill. Skill is so important, and brilliant with the ball. He could dodge and beat anybody, and yet he was absolutely fearless. He would tackle the biggest guys in the game. He showed no fear whatsoever, and we'll always remember him. Certainly I will, and I'm sure everybody watching this podcast will as well.
And also just what him, his family, Kevin Sinfield have done for the MND community. It's a public figure. We've seen, I guess, his fight It's been heavily publicised. So I think, and we will touch on this in a second, but the BBC documentary I watched last night on Rob Burrow, one of the things I picked up on was the doctor saying that people are coming to her now saying that they had Rob Burrow's disease and they knew what they were in for.
You could almost rename it, couldn't you? Rob Burrow's disease, I suppose. It's become, so identified with it. But yes, it's incredible that people who have this is actually a near neighbour of mine died from MND just a few months ago, earlier this year. And it's so much more widespread than perhaps we might have thought otherwise. But yes, and it's just amazing. But I thought the BBC programme last night, There's Only One Rob Burrow, what a great programme that was, wasn't it? It was so moving and so fascinating, and gave such an incredible insight into what the family had been going through, and the gradual change in Rob over the period since his diagnosis. But also, it showed him, some of his great moments in rugby league, but also as a little kid, watching those shots of him. I don't know how old he must have been, maybe about 7 or 8, I suppose, or maybe a bit older, because he looked 7 or 8 when he was probably about 17 or 18, I think, did Rob. But, beating kids twice his size, sidestepping them, you could see that he was going to be a great player, couldn't you, from those video shots. And what a great job his family did to get them, because not everybody videos their kids playing, in those kids' games, do they?
That's right. And like the footwork he was showing at that early age, it was like, almost getting in a time machine, going back and watching him as a kid, because we saw that footwork on display in some of the biggest moments in our games. But when you look back at Robbie Burrow's career, both on the field and off, I guess, what are some of the standout memories for you, Martyn, from what you've seen?
Gosh, there are so many. I actually remember seeing him play for the Great Britain Academy back in, would it be about 2000, 2001? And you could see then that his potential was going to lead him on to big things. But obviously, the two grand finals when he won the Harry Sunderland Trophy as man of the match, 2007, 2011, and that amazing try that he scored, in the 2011 grand final, which has been repeated an awful lot on TV in the last day or so. I mean, those are the absolute highlights of Rob's career, but also his performances for England and Great Britain as well, as well as Leeds. But he was the archetypal one club man, wasn't he? I think he made his debut for Leeds in 2001. And bowed out at the end of 2017 with the grand final that year under the captaincy of Danny Maguire. But no, it's just an amazing career, and I would recommend anybody who's not read it to read this book, Rob's autobiography. An absolutely fantastic read, and the incredible thing about that book is that there's not an ounce of self-pity in it, and. I was completely in awe of Rob Burrow, partly because, I was in awe of him actually when he was a player at the height of his powers, because I was so impressed that such a small player could do so many things on the rugby field. But even more so when he was diagnosed with this disease, I always think, when this happens to somebody, I always tend to think, what would have happened if that had been me being diagnosed in that way? Would I have been able to respond as positively as Rob did? And I'm not really sure that I could have done.
No.
I'm not... People like Rob are so special because, excuse me, they have qualities that the rest of us don't share. And I think that's true of Rob. It's certainly true of Kevin Sinfield, who's done so much to, help raise money for the Rob Burrow Foundation, the centre that's going to be built in Leeds. And I think the fans recognise that. So many fans who turned up to Headingley on Friday, on Sunday night rather, who were there to pay tribute to him. I think all of us recognise that he was such a special guy.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things that summed him up in that BBC documentary last night was, I think it might have been Lindsay's comments, that when he found out about the diagnosis, he said, I'm grateful that it's me and this hasn't happened to the kids. And it's just like, such a, just a great guy, and what a great family man, a great father. And
I think I was actually on Sky News on Sunday night, one of the Sky News programmes. They phoned me up and said, could you comment about Rob? And I did, and I almost lost it. I became very emotional, and almost burst into tears, to be honest. And but I did make the point that whatever else Rob did in his life, the greatest thing he did was marry Lindsay, because she's incredible. I think an incredible woman, gave him such unstinting, selfless support, and held their marriage together, and the family and so on. What an incredible woman she is, and if anybody deserves to be recognised now that Rob's no longer here, I think she does. She's amazing.
No, absolutely.
And it's funny, actually, it's funny, that so many people have been sort of talking to me who wouldn't otherwise talk to me about rugby league, after this news. I actually live in the wilds of North Yorkshire, and I called into my newsagent yesterday morning, and the lady behind the counter, who's never talked to me about anything to do with rugby league before, she said, "Oh gosh, Rob Burrow, how desperately sad." She said, I read his book. I said, "Oh, I'm so glad you did." She says, "Yes, I was flying away on holiday somewhere on a plane, and I took that book with me to read." And she said, she said, "You know what stood out for me in the book?" And I thought she'd say something really profound, and something that Rob had said or done. She said, "No, it was what he said. What Lindsay, who had a section devoted to her in the book, said that when they they got married, and then when Rob broke through into the first team at Headingley, he bought her a designer handbag, and she said, "That's not what I want. It's you that I love, not your money." And that's so interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that a woman well away from that family should pick up on that and make that point about Lindsay.
No, absolutely. And another thing I really took out of that documentary last night was when Rob did the announcement that he'd been diagnosed with MND. I believe it was with the BBC. I think Tanya Arnold might have done the one-on-one interview. There was a part of the interview there where he sort of broke down and he got a bit emotional. And then you sort of saw Kevin Sinfield, I believe, come from behind the camera and just sort of console him and pat him on the back, gave him a hug, and just sort of gave him those encouraging words. And you could see that was, Kevin was there with him from the start, and it really shines a light on the rugby league brotherhood, the mates that you make playing this sport, that rugby league fraternity, and it just goes to show the type of qualities and the character of Kevin Sinfield. And,
oh gosh, yes.
I even believe, I think Robbie said that it was almost like he had a guardian angel in Kevin Sinfield, and I think it's safe to say now you could almost say that Kevin's got a guardian angel in Robbie, who's tragically not with us. So just a really, really great job by the BBC with that documentary.
No doubt.
Yes,
I mean, it's funny, I've just paid my BBC TV licence, and I'm glad to say it makes it work.
No, absolutely, because there's a lot of people out there that don't pay them.
Some don't. No.
But yes, we'll always remember what he did on and off the field, and it's the legacy he's left behind will always be remembered, I think.
It makes everything else we're going to talk about today seem a bit sort of trivial by comparison, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
We have to crack on, and
that's right.
The world has to move on, and but I mean, the next thing for Rob will be his funeral. I don't think we've seen the details of that yet, but my goodness, that's going to be an incredibly emotional occasion.
And I'm sure there'll be a big tribute to him at the Challenge Cup this weekend down at Wembley. So, we'll look forward to that one. And we will have to, unfortunately, get into some of the other news, Martyn. we've had another weekend full of rugby league,
Yes.
which is, always hard to keep up and watch all of those matches. But how about we start with the matches on Friday night, mate? We had Huddersfield 24 defeating Hull FC 18. A tight matchup, this one.
Well, it was in the end. I mean, Hull have got this strange habit at the moment of, looking as though they're going to head for a very heavy defeat and then, scoring a couple of tries late on to make the scoreline a lot more acceptable. But and they are improving slowly. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They are getting gradually better. I thought Herman Esse. I was really glad to see him. I think we talked about it last week, didn't we? That he was found not guilty of that, accusation of having abused the player when they played London. I thought he had a great game for Hull, and he got the 3 points in our Albert Goldthorpe medal. And that's great. But Huddersfield had to win that game to keep in touch with the top six, and they did do. But in the end, only by the skin of their teeth, and they'll need to keep winning now if they're going to make an impact on this season at all.
No, absolutely, yeah. A little bit of pressure off their shoulders, but Hull FC, it's I guess you can't celebrate too much after beating the Black and Whites, with how they are at the moment.
No. But they've got some good young players, Hull, and. They do have hope for the future, and I'd be interested to. Pity we can't talk to John Cartwright about what he thought in watching that game. Of course, he's going to coach them next season, so he would be an interested observer, wouldn't he? I think.
No, absolutely. There is some promising signs, but yeah, we'll have to wait out and hold out and see if those come to fruition. We'll move on to the next matchup. St Helens 24 defeated Catalans 12.
Well, Catalans are struggling with injuries at the moment, but St Helens, I thought were extremely efficient. The Catalans took a 6-0 lead quite early on with a try from Tom Johnston, which came from a brilliant crossfield kick into the corner by Jordan Abdul. And Jordan Abdul is so good at doing that sort of thing. He's such a talented player. And it was such a marvellous kick because it just evaded Jack Welsby at full back and just fell into Tom Johnston's hands. It was so perfectly judged that you sort of think, wow, that's real skill. I made it the try of the week in League Express. Actually, I was so impressed by it. But after that, St Helens came back and gradually wrested control of the game, and the Catalans didn't score again until it was too late, with Julian Busquet going over after 74 minutes. But Jack Welsby's really hitting form at the moment, isn't he? He's so creative from full back and creating opportunities for his teammates and so on. And St Helens were convincing winners in the end.
I was going to ask you, St Helens not being in the Challenge Cup final, do you think that will, when we get to the end of the season, we look back on the year, do we think we'll look at this as a positive for the Saints in terms of they may not have that Challenge Cup hangover that some teams experience?
Well, I'm sure they'd rather have it than not, Jake. It's a bit like saying, did they have a hangover last year when they won the World Club Challenge? Yeah. Well, they did, didn't they?
Yeah.
But they were still very glad that they did it, and they did a great job going over to Penrith and winning it. So, yeah, it's very hard to say. One thing that I would say about St Helens is they are introducing one or two younger players. George Delane is now an established prop forward for them, and he's still only 19 or 20, I forget his exact age. But they've got another young lad coming through, Noah Stevens, who was on the bench, I think playing only his second game for St Helens, and he spent quite a bit of time on the pitch, and he's big, strong and very impressive looking young man. And if they've got that quality of youngster coming through, that's a real great sign, isn't it?
No, absolutely. They've always had pretty decent depth there, haven't they? And interesting to see what he'll make of his career, and it's just only the start. So.
Yeah, we still don't know what St Helens' plans are to replace Lewis Dodd either, do we? We don't quite know whether they're going to put Moses Mbai at scrum half next year, or whether they're going to make a move for another player. That remains to be seen.
Moses played quite well on the weekend.
I think Moses is a very good player. Yeah. Oh gosh, yes, no doubt about that.
And I think if they can't find the right candidate, they'll be,
well,
very
if they can't
fine
find
with him.
if they can't find the right candidate, they won't sign anybody. That's the thing about Saints. They do the research into players, and they ultimately do make good signings by and large.
Oh, absolutely. We'll move on to Saturday's matchups. We had Wigan 19 defeating Warrington 18, a very surprising scoreline.
I think you were there when you were at that game.
I head along to this match, and wasn't the scoreline I was expecting, that's for sure. Warrington, obviously, they had 4 debutants playing. I think they had only 5 players in their 17 from the week before. Whereas Wigan, they did rest some of their players, but they still had the likes of Harry Smith, Bevan French playing.
They only had one debutant, didn't they? Jacob Douglas on the wing, who looks a very good player. But I thought the youngsters did Warrington proud, and Sam Burgess, they did him proud as well. It's always a difficult one, isn't it? When you're playing a match like this, only a week ahead of the Challenge Cup. This is another reason why I think the Challenge Cup final ought to be nearer the end of the season, the week before the grand final, because what you find is that when it's mid-season, it disrupts the preceding games. Coaches pick weakened sides, and you could say, well, that sort of is unfortunate for the fans who watch those games, that they don't see the best players. But having said that, I would imagine that all the Warrington fans must have been thrilled to see the performance of young players like Kai Taylor-Ray at full-back, who looked an excellent player. Young Jake Thewlis, Nolan Tapir, and Ben Hartill. Those are the debutants, and none of them let the side down. Aaron Lindop, looks a very good young player as well to me. And, of course, this game was characterised by the incident where Adam Kearnan got the red card, and he's now been suspended for 3 matches, I believe. And you've got to say, it looked a very serious incident to me. Obviously, Aaron Lindop took it in the head. But to give credit to that young player, he got straight up, didn't he? He didn't lie on the floor and try to milk the penalty. He just, was out to prove that he was tough enough to, get up as quickly as possible. And, all credit to him.
And I believe Tyler Dupree's also going to miss some time for that. I think he headbutted someone that wasn't picked up in the match, but I think the match review panel sort of picked up on that. So they're both going to miss the Challenge Cup final this weekend.
Yes, gosh.
2 huge losses for Matty Pete. It also brings back that discussion you and I have had for different competitions. Should suspensions count? Semi Burgess obviously came out. He said in his post-match press conference he would prefer to see those 2 players involved in the match because he wants to verse the strongest Wigan.
Of course, yeah.
Which shows the ultimate competitor in
he
Sam.
Is, yes, yeah.
I'm not sure all coaches would have that same perspective.
No. The thing that, obviously after that game, Sam will be the happier coach, although Wigan won it. Warrington took a 12-0 lead. Things were going great for them, but then inevitably Wigan fought back. And by half-time, it was 19-12. And my thought at half-time was, well, Wigan are going to stretch the lead by another 20 points or so at least, and they'll end up winning easily. Well, that didn't happen, did it? It shows how much I know. Instead, Warrington fought back again, and they actually scored a great try through Stephen Ratchford, but only on 78 minutes, which was a bit too late, really. But they ended at 1 point behind, and if the 2 teams play with that spirit, if Warrington play with that spirit on Saturday, and Wigan play like they did on last Saturday, then Warrington will win. But the thing is, Wigan won't play like that. Yeah. And despite missing Kieran and Tyler Dupree, whoever steps in for those 2 players, they will be absolutely committed and determined. And anybody who thinks that Wigan are going to be an easy touch are just crazy.
No, absolutely. And, obviously Wigan will get back a few players as well. So will Warrington. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in this matchup, Martyn. But, I can't wait.
Just on, we'll talk about the Challenge Cup a bit later, won't we? Something I just want to point out, actually, but I'll do that later.
Yeah, no worries, mate. All right, the next matchup, we had Hull KR 12 defeating Leigh 0.
Yes, I mean, that was such a hard-fought game. And, Hull KR are such a formidable force now at their stadium, Craven Park. It's just... Leigh were always going to struggle to win there, but I thought they, tried really hard and just fell by 12 points, and it was a great effort by them. But and it makes it difficult now for them to, feel any confidence that they're going to get into the top 6 by the end of the season. But they're still going to be pushing hard, and I still think they're a top 6 side, as I've said several times before on this podcast. But the thing that's a bit frustrating for Hull KR fans, though, is Ryan Hall not scoring any tries. He's been one try behind Danny Maguire as the greatest ever try scorer in Super League now for a few weeks. Hull KR scored a bucket load of tries against London a week or so ago, but Ryan wasn't among the scorers. And again on Saturday, he didn't score against Leigh. So, when on earth, how long are we going to have to wait to see him break that record? It is keeping us in suspense, isn't he?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he'll get there eventually, touch wood.
You would think so.
Hope so. But, maybe they just need to send a bit more attack out his side and see if he can finish one off. But, yes, a tight match. And I think if it's one thing Leigh can take out of it, it's the fact that they didn't get flogs, because for and against is so important this year, isn't it? So hopefully they can bounce back, in a couple of weeks' time. We'll move on to Sunday's matchups. We had Leeds 32 defeating Castleford.
No, that was still on Saturday.
Oh, Saturday, yes.
Still on Saturday.
So 32-4. What did you make of that matchup, Martyn?
Well, again, Leeds needed to win this game. There's been a lot of pressure on Rowan Smith at Leeds, and if they'd not beaten Castleford at home, I think it would have been very serious for him. Even Gary Hetherington has said recently that the team's not doing well enough. Well, that's a warning sign, isn't it, for a coach when a chief exec says that. Of course, they're going to get a new director of rugby, and we'll have to wait and see who that might be. It could even be Tony Smith, I suppose, Rowan's uncle. But I thought it was a good performance from Leeds, and Castleford were missing a few players, mainly Paul McShane, so their task was a lot harder. But they've got a young hooker called Kane Robb, who I thought was outstanding for Castleford in a losing side. So, it's not all doom and gloom for Castleford. I think they've got some really good young players who are coming through the ranks. And, I mean, Craig Lingard is trying to lower expectations for Castleford at the moment. After every game, it sort of says, we're not really a top 6 side and so on, which obviously is true. But, I think he's just sort of managing expectations and not wanting the Castleford fans to get too carried away. And obviously it would have been disappointing for them to lose by that margin. But, I think they are, despite that result, I think they are still improving. And I think they'll give a few teams a few problems before this season ends.
That's right. And we have seen them with some really good performances this year.
Oh, yes.
That does lift people's hopes, I guess. So
absolutely.
Stay patient, Cas fans.
Well, that's the only thing they can do, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
And better days are ahead. And then, we'll move on to Sunday's matchup and the final matchup of the round. Salford 34 defeated London 4. Not too surprising, this one. Probably good for Salford to score some points like that. But
yes, it was. I mean, London were competitive until half-time, weren't they? It was only 6-0 at half-time, and you thought, well, they could be in with a chance here. But in the second half, I think Max Need took control of the game, and they gradually ran away with it, and it was a fairly standard victory in a sense that keeps Salford right in the running for the top six. I think they're in sixth place at the moment, aren't they? With if I just look at the table here, with 16 points, level with Catalans now. St Helens and Wigan are top on 20, and Ulster and Warrington are third and fourth on 18, and Leeds are just outside the top six with 14 points, 2 points behind Salford, and then Huddersfield are 2 points behind Leeds. So it's still very competitive, and that was obviously a win that Salford had to have.
Especially after their first trip down to London early in the year. They only just scraped through with the victory.
Yes. Yeah.
I think there's only 4 or 6 points in that one, so I'm sure they're glad that they're able to score a few more this time round.
I'd have thought so, yes.
Now, just some of our talking points over the last week or so. There's been some rumours that Leigh are going to make a signing in the next week or so. I think they're speculating that Aaron Penne, the Melbourne Storm...
Well, he's been speculated about for quite some time, hasn't he? And of course, Ben Nakubuvai has now gone out elsewhere, so they've got the space on the overseas quota to do that.
Yeah,
so they probably will.
And he's a pretty good player, but just can't crack that Melbourne Storm side.
No, it's not easy to crack that side, is it?
No. All right, mate. Well, how about we take a look at this weekend's Challenge Cup? We'll start with obviously the Warrington versus Wigan game. What was the point that you wanted to touch on before, mate, when we were talking about
this thing about it's always very odd, isn't it, to have two teams playing each other in the week before a major Challenge Cup final. Now, Wigan and Warrington have only played each other once before in the Challenge Cup final at Wembley, and that was in 1990, and Wigan won that game convincingly, 36 points to 14. That was back to the days when Wigan were building an incredible dynasty. It was their third successive Challenge Cup win, and they would go on to win the Challenge Cup 8 times in a row in total. And back then they had some really great players. But the interesting thing is, and the sort of omen for this game is that a week earlier, Wigan and Warrington played that year as well. In fact, they were playing in the first round of what was then the Premiership competition, which was a sort of competition not to decide the championship, but a sort of add-on competition to the league at the end of the season. And they played at Central Park, the old Wigan ground, and Wigan beat Warrington 28-26, so that Wigan beat them by 2 points. As opposed to last Saturday, they beat them by 1 point. But everybody said, "Oh gosh, this could be a really tight Challenge Cup final in that case." But in fact, in the Challenge Cup final, Wigan beat Warrington by 22 points. So it's a sort of ominous sort of story for Warrington, I suppose you might say. And I'm sure it's not one that they'd want to look back on. And but it's a bit of a warning. Don't think that Wigan are in any sense going to be an easy touch on Saturday, because they won't, no matter who plays for them.
And it could be a bit of an omen, you might say. Do we know who the favourites are? Do the bookmakers have as a bit of a type?
I've not looked actually, Jake, but I'd be very surprised if Wigan weren't the favourites. But you never know. I should think they might be pretty even by now.
Because I'd imagine, obviously, the Kearnan and Dupree news would affect...
edge it towards Warrington.
Yes, but it'd be interesting to see. One player I thought played very well over the weekend, and I expect will play well at Wembley as well, was Josh Drinkwater, Martyn.
Well, he created all 3 Warrington tries, scored the second one himself, which he created himself, but his kicking game... Josh Drinkwater's kicking game in the last few weeks has really come to the fore, hasn't it?
That's right. And that's the thing, if you can dictate the terms of the match with your attacking kicks, your long kicks, trying to steer the territory and in possession in your favour, it can go a long way to turning around some of the big packs like Wigan. But
interestingly, he was playing without George Williams on Saturday, because actually George Williams was suspended for a game. And it sort of comes back to that point you made earlier. I mean, if George Williams had been suspended this week, for example, instead of last week, then he would be missing the Challenge Cup final, and that would seem, quite harsh, wouldn't it? And a bit unfair. I mean, Stefan Ratchford played at standoff half against Wigan, and it didn't look a bad combination to me.
Now, do you think Stefan Ratchford, he's been the 18th man over the last few weeks. He got a run last week.
He must be sweating, mustn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, he'll know by now whether he's playing. I mean, Sam Burgess will have told him. But it would be. Stefan is near the end of his career. He's obviously in his mid-30s, so he's at the veteran. He's been a wonderful player, a great player, one of my favourite players. And I'd love to see him get onto the field at Wembley this Saturday, from a purely emotional perspective. But I suspect that Sam Burgess will have no truck with emotion, and he will pick the 17 players who he thinks are best able to beat Wigan. And whether Stefan will be in that 17 or not, it remains to be seen, doesn't it?
Now, if you look at both of these sides, Martyn, there's a lot of strike players. Do you think this will be a match-up that will have a lot of points scored from both sides, or do you think this will be a tough defensive battle?
Well, I hope it. I'd like to think it will be a game that has plenty of points scored. And don't forget, there will be a strong tribute to Rob Burrow before the game on Saturday, and we remember Rob for some of the great tries he scored. It would be great to see some tries of that sort of quality if we could sort of arrange it so that I'd love nothing more than to see George Williams zipping in for Warrington and Bevan French zipping in length of the field tries for Wigan, and Jay Field and all these wonderful players, and there are some wonderful players on both sides. Matty Ashton, who tends to specialise in length of the field efforts as well for Warrington. How great it would be to see that, and I hope it's not just purely an attritional game, because I think one of the things that Rob's very sad death has done is it'll probably focus more attention on the cup final than it otherwise would have, to be honest, and I think it may attract a lot of viewers and a lot of reporters, hopefully, to report and link their reports to, his sad death earlier this week. And so, we all would hope to see a great game that, reflects the sort of guy that Rob was.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I was just thinking of when you mentioned Matty Ashton's long field tries, his corner post put downs as well, his acrobatic finishes, brilliant. And the same could be said for Liam Marshall on the other side of the field as well. He's had some outstanding put downs in the last few weeks as well.
Yeah. Well, he had one on Saturday against Warrington, didn't he?
He always did a front flip through the air to put that ball down. So everywhere you look across the park, there's talent on both sides of the field. And from all reports, it sounds like both clubs are selling a lot of tickets.
Well, it's interesting again, isn't it? The attendance back in 1990 was, what was it? I think I've got it here somewhere, 77,000 and odd. Did I make a note of it? No, I can't actually see that I did. But it was a crowd of 77,729. I would love to see Saturday's attendance beat that one. I don't think it will, but quite a few people are hoping it gets to 75,000, and it would just be great to see it. Exceed that crowd back in 1990.
No, absolutely. There's obviously, what do we got? 5 more days now till Challenge Cup, so plenty of time for fans out there to grab their tickets. Make sure you go out and grab them because it will be a fantastic contest.
If you can get down there, please do. Yes,
absolutely. Now we will move on to. Do you want to do the women's matchup or the 1895?
Well, the women's, that's the first game, isn't it? So we ought to do that. We should have done that first, really, anyway.
My bad.
That's the start. The start. I mean, repeat of last year's Challenge Cup final, St Helens and Leeds. Appropriate that Leeds are there, isn't it? In the light of the sad news about Rob. And I'm sure the Leeds girls, if they needed any extra motivation to win this game, I think that has given them it. And hopefully they'll play great. But St Helens, my goodness, they're the holders. They're I think most people would say, still probably the best women's team in the competition. And I think it's going to be a great game. And I just hope that if people can get down there, they can get down there to see the full women's game. I think it'd be a sight very much worth seeing. I think it. What time does it kick off? 11:45. So, you need to be down there pretty sharpish if you're heading from the north of England on Saturday. But I'm sure it'll be worth it.
No, absolutely. And I'm just trying to think. Last year there was people coming through the gates. There was a pretty decent crowd. Obviously, it got more people in as the match went on. But if you're going to buy a ticket, you may as well go and see all three games, right?
You might as well, yeah.
Get your money's worth.
There's no doubt about it.
And that walk from the train stop up towards Wembley, just walking
Wembley Way.
Yeah, Wembley Way. It's a great experience. There's a lot of fans getting around in their different jerseys. Obviously, we've got 6 different clubs going to Wembley this weekend, so I'm sure there'll be plenty of things happening outside the stadium, plenty of fanfare stuff. So, really looking forward to that one, mate. But we also have the 1895 Cup kicking off after the Challenge Cup. Who do you like in this one, mate? We've got Wakefield.
Well, it's got to be Wakefield, really. Wakefield are the favourites, and I can't. And they'll take about 5,000 fans down there. I think. I'm not quite up with the latest ticket sales for Wakefield, but they'll take a lot of fans. It's their first time at Wembley since losing to Widnes in the Challenge Cup in 1979. So it's been a long wait, 45 years since Wakefield were last at Wembley, and I'm sure they will be really keen to win this game. Apart from anything else, it gets them a small number of points in the gradings table. That's not their only motivation, of course, but it will be useful for them if they do win it, because they are hoping to be in Super League next year. So I can only see Wakefield winning. But Sheffield, on the other hand, the great thing about Sheffield Eagles is that they've never lost at Wembley. They've played there twice. They beat Wigan in 1998, which was the biggest shock result ever in the history of Wembley Challenge Cup finals. 17-8, I still remember that game as though it was yesterday. And then in 2019, the very first 1895 Cup final, they beat Widnes at Wembley. So they've got a proud and beaten record to defend, and I'm sure they'll defend it very, very well.
Now, looking at the awards, so who do you think, if you had to pick a candidate, let's just say from Warrington and Wigan for the Lance Todd?
Well, the two candidates are the two strongest candidates from, I think are very straightforward. George Williams and Bevan French. If either of those two players has a great game, they might well win it for their team. So I'd be amazed if it wasn't one of those. But then again, it could be anybody. If it's a forward-dominated game, you could get someone like Junior and Semba coming through, who's been playing so great recently, winning it for Wigan, or you could have one of the equivalent players, young James Harrison, doing well for Warrington. It's a toss-up, isn't it? Who knows who's going to win it? I very rarely manage to pick the Lance Todd Trophy winner successfully.
It's tough.
Yeah.
And who's to say Matty Ashton or Leah Marshall don't score 3 or 4 tries each? They could very well.
Of course they could.
do that. So, and then the battle of the fullbacks: Matt Duffy, Jay Field. It's well, really anyone's, isn't it?
Last year, Lachlan Lamb won it, and of course he kicked the winning field goal. So that was no surprise really, was it? A great performance by him, and it'll be something like that again this year, I hope. I hope it'll be as close this year as it was last year.
Because what an exciting finish that was.
It certainly was.
My palms were sweating sitting there in the stadium watching it, and hopefully we can get plenty of fans down there. It'll be a great day out. But what we will do, mate, is, unless there's anything else you want to touch on Challenge Cup wise, there's some other rugby league news
No, I think we can move on.
Yeah.
We've got State of Origin to talk about,
Yes,
apart from anything
that's
else.
right. But before we get into State of Origin, do you want to quickly touch on the Parramatta Eels head coaching
Oh,
candidates?
gosh, yes. Brian McDermott, one of 6 candidates, isn't he? The former Leeds coach. And whether he'll get it, who knows? I mean, it's obviously a very competitive situation there, but 1 or 2 assistant coaches are in for it, aren't they? Jason Riles from Melbourne, Josh Hannay from Cronulla, apart from Brian. And then an interesting candidate, Michael Checker from... the Lebanon National Rugby League coach who's been an assistant in the past at the Roosters, but is better known for being a rugby union coach, having coached Argentina until very recently, and a very smart guy. That would be a very interesting appointment to give it to him, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah. And, we've spoke about it in previous episodes about the amount of, rugby league coaches that have gone to union. It'd be interesting to get one back, you know what I mean?
So, well, I think he'd do a good job personally, but whether they want to go down that route, who knows?
And he's done a pretty good job with that Lebanon side as well.
Very good, yeah.
We'll keep our eyes peeled and see.
Well, I
once
went to a seminar in Leeds that he gave, and it was very impressive, actually, Jake. So he knows a lot about rugby league. He knows a lot about coaching, and. I wouldn't imagine he'd be the favourite for the job, but I think if he gets in front of the directors of Parramatta to explain his coaching philosophy, I think he might go down very well.
That's right. And, Jason Riles has always been touted as the next assistant coach to become a head coach. He was in rugby union coaching as well, wasn't he, with England, with Eddie Jones at one time. So, quite a few coaches have had that dual code experience. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think he was offered the Dragons head coaching role. He knocked that back.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was Shane Flanagan following that. He stayed on with Storm as an assistant, and he's been touted to take over from Craig Bellamy when he decides to call it quits. But as we touched on before the podcast, Bellamy's been doing these 1-year extensions
he'll
every
never
year.
Give up, will he?
No, he's too competitive.
He's another Wayne Bennett. I think I get the feeling that Bellamy thinks about retirement, but then thinks, well, what would I do in retirement? And he's the sort of guy who, is such a competitive fellow that retirement probably wouldn't suit him.
That's right. So we'll sit tight and see where Parramatta decide to, go with that search. It'd be great to see Brian McDermott getting a head coaching role.
Oh, it would. An Englishman coaching in the NRL. That would be terrific.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed, and best of luck to Brian McDermott. We hope he, goes well and hopefully gets through to the last sort of panel interviews, you might say.
Well, let's hope, yeah.
And then tomorrow, mate, we've got State of Origin Game 1 kicking off. There's been a little bit of news over the last week. Dylan Edwards has had to pull out due to a quad strain, which sees James
Isn't
Tedesco...
that unlucky for him? He gets picked at last and then picks up an injury in training. Crikey, that's bad luck. But, where one door closes, another door opens, and... James Tedesco is getting that opportunity.
That's right. And are you expecting, with Tedesco coming back, he's obviously got a huge chip on his shoulder, a lot to prove. What are you expecting from him? Do you think he'll have a big performance?
I think he will.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much doubt about that. If ever anybody needed motivation to play well, it's James Tedesco, having been dropped from the game but then being brought back at the last minute. And I think he's been very gracious. If you look at his comments, he's been very sympathetic, towards Dylan Walker. But he's up for it. There's no doubt about it. And Michael Maguire's the coach. Again, another guy who originally came through the Melbourne system, and I think he's going to give Billy Slater's Maroons quite a game.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we touched on it last week. He's picked a squad based on work ethic and character. And, he's certainly got a bit of a theme to this year's squad. So it's going to be a tightly contested battle. I think it'll kick off at about 11 a.m. our time.
Yes, it will, yeah.
So, if you're not working, even if you are at work, maybe sneakily put it up on your computer monitor or put it up on your phone.
Yeah.
It'll be a great contest. And hopefully my Queensland Maroons can get a win to
well,
start
you
the
would
series.
hope so, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But same question again, Martyn. If you had to pick a player of the match candidate from both teams for tomorrow's matchup, who do you like?
Well, I think Tedesco will be the man who shines, and of course for Queensland, Reece Walsh. You would think. I mean, it's going to be an interesting battle of the full backs. I think Reece Walsh is such a brilliant player. is very much, a sort of Australian version in a way of Rob Burrow, isn't he? He's got that incredible footwork and speed and agility on the field. It's such a pleasure to watch, and I think he's going to really. I think he will have a big game.
Yeah, I agree. The only other person I can really think of, without knowing what happens, obviously, I think with New South Wales, you might say inexperienced due to the number of players that will be making their New South Wales Blues debut. I think this is a good opportunity for Daly Cherry Evans, for the Maroons, to use his experience to try and exploit that.
Oh yeah, well he's 35, isn't he now? He's at the veteran stage, but he seems to age like a fine wine, doesn't he, Daly Cherry Evans? He's playing better than ever. Right. And the battle of the halfbacks is going to be very, very interesting, isn't it? Because there's Jerome Luai, who I think's been playing really well since Nathan Cleary got injured at Penrith, and he's partnering Nico Hines, who actually had quite a poor game in his last game for Cronulla, but again is a potentially really fine player, and that halfback combination is going to be up against Tom Dearden and Daly Cherry Evans. Well, I think Tom Dearden's been playing really well for North Queensland, which of course is why he's been picked. So I think that there's such a lot of incredible interest in this game, I think, Jake.
Yeah, and what I will say to our viewers and listeners, if you haven't had a chance, go on to Instagram, or I believe the same videos will be put up on Facebook. But if you look at the Maroons' accounts this year, they must have a new videographer in, and they're doing heaps of little videos of them at training. And it's brought a lot of followers to their page. And I'll have to show you after this episode, Martyn, but it's like almost creating a lot of excitement around the game. And I just wish that every club, both in the NRL and over in Super League here, would look at that account, see how it's being run, and take some inspiration for their own. Oh, yes,
absolutely, yeah.
Because, they're doing a really good job of marketing that squad and this series.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It'll be very interesting to see. I think the crowd is going to be 80,000, isn't it? And it's sold out. And it's going to be interesting to see the TV viewing figures as well, because that's always a test of how popular a game is.
No, absolutely. One more question for you, Martyn. A bit of a hypothetical here. I heard it discussed on NRL 360. So, if New South Wales win Game 1 and James Tedesco plays really well, do they pick and stick with Tedesco for Game 2, or do they go back to
no doubt about it. I think that's an easy question to answer. Yeah. There's no doubt about it, particularly because they say that Dylan Walker's probably going to be out for 3 weeks anyway.
Edwards, you mean?
Dylan Edwards. Sorry, I keep saying Walker.
That's right.
Dylan Edwards. Yeah. So if Tedesco plays well, I think he's got the spot for the series.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Absolutely,
especially in Origin. All right, mate. Well, anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up today, mate?
Well, just the women's state of origin as well, because that's being played the following day, this Thursday at Newcastle, and it's completely sold out, which is a 30,000 stadium.
Yeah.
That's just incredible, isn't it? And the first game, New South Wales are going into this game 1-up, so Queensland will be really highly motivated to draw level. But the first game got an absolutely unprecedented TV viewing audience of 944,000 on free-to-air on the Nine network, and that was quite incredible. And I noticed, women's sport in Australia got a fantastic boost with the FIFA Women's World Cup. And the Australian women's team, they call the Matildas, they racked up some incredible viewing figures on TV during that tournament that actually eclipsed State of Origin and any other Australian sport. But I noticed that they've recently had a 2-game series against China, and the first game in Adelaide, they got a massive crowd, as they did for the second game in Sydney. But their viewing figures have now fallen behind the women's State of Origin game. I think they got about 750,000 nationwide for that first game against China, which was about 200,000 less than the women's State of Origin game. So that's really interesting, isn't it? That women's sport has benefited from the Matildas, and the women's State of Origin in particular has risen to new heights, and the quality is just fantastic.
That's right. And with this will come more investment in women's sports and grassroots sports, and it's only going to improve the product, which is improving those viewing figures, I think.
Well, the NRLW is one of the smartest things that the NRL has done, in my view. The quality of the games, the quality of rugby that some of these women are playing is terrific, and it's just wonderful to watch. So I'd recommend anybody to watch the Women's State of Origin game as well as the men's this year.
No, absolutely. No, I can't wait. And Newcastle, they love their rugby league. So,
they do.
Really exciting. Hopefully Queensland can chalk up a tally mark on that board and we can have an exciting decider in a few weeks' time. All right, guys. Well, we might end it here. We will remind our viewers and listeners, if you do want to grab your copy to subscription to League Express, head along to www.totalrl.com/shop. Again, they got the
it's very sad front page, but it should be available in the shop still, hopefully towards the end of the week, and I hope you all enjoy reading it.
No, absolutely. And we've got the Rugby League World magazine there as well, mate. The Rob Burrow autobiography. Make sure you grab a copy of both of those.
Yes, that's right. This obviously came out before Rob's death, Rugby League World, but it's got Toby King on the front, and he'll be playing at Wembley on Saturday, obviously. So that's really something to enjoy reading too.
And I'm sure there'll be plenty of tributes, both in next week's edition of League Express and next month's Rugby League World magazine to Rob Burrow.
I'm sure there will be. Yeah.
Certainly keep your eyes out for that. And don't forget to hit subscribe on YouTube, guys. We're ticking along with the subscribers there. Yeah, you'll be notified every time we upload our episodes, and I believe we're still kicking goals on the streaming services as well, Martyn.
I think we're getting... Well, last week we had I think about 3,300 downloads. So that's just on streaming, not on YouTube.
Yeah,
so that's not too bad, is it?
Yeah, we'll take that.
Absolutely.
And we're really appreciative of all the people who do tune in every week. We see the comments under the videos, and maybe for this week's episode, let us know who you think's going to win all three matches this weekend at Wembley. Maybe give us a scoreline as well.
And finally, can we just... something we've not done in the show yet, send our very deep and sincere condolences to the Burrow family for their loss, because we started on talking about Rob, and I think it's appropriate that the last thing we do on this podcast is just send our condolences to everybody in that wonderful family.
No, absolutely, mate. Couldn't have said it any better myself. All right, guys. Well, thanks again, and we'll do it all again next week, Martyn.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Thanks,
mate.
Jack.